one statement, please.
I'd like some legal representation. These police officers have not allowed me to have any. I don't know what this is all about.
How'd you get the black eye?
No, sir, I didn't. People
How'd you
keep
get the
asking me
black
that.
eye?
Sir?
You shoot the president?
I work in that building.
Were you in the building at the time?
Naturally, if I work in that building, yes, sir.
Back up, man.
Come on, man. President?
No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I lived in the Soviet Union. I'm just a patsy.
President?
Yeah, I know. And here's what you say.
You read from this card and then you shoot him.
You killed my president, you rat bastard. And all the cops are like, no. Oh, boy. Oh, man. I don't know if I'm going to be sounding delirious today, Dan, just because I had my second vaccination today and I am just a bit delirious, or just because of the subject matter. But this is going to be one for the books. Or also just because this is going to be, ostensibly, we're kind of trying to record 2 episodes in one sitting.
Yeah,
and that
bit of a slog.
That might be a little delirium inducing, but, you know, what are you going to do?
We'll find out. We'll find out. What did I say? Don't get your jab and then drink beer? Cheers.
Dan's always saying that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, what are you going to do? This is sponsored by Northern Monk.
Yeah, oh, that's very nice. A delicious hazy pale ale.
Yeah, in it.
Which I'm going to sup at very gradually because my my podcasting faculties are easily compromised. And the story we have to tell today is compromising of one's sanity enough.
It is. Yeah. This one's been a long time coming, Dan.
I know.
This one, I don't remember exactly when I lent you this book, but It's
been a while.
It's been a while.
Basically, the entirety of the time that we spent doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Because you read this last summer, right?
And then, yes, when I was back home.
Yeah, you came back and you gave me the book.
The book.
And it took me a little while to get round to reading it. And I was promised it would, I don't know, blow my mind.
Because I'd never really known anything about this. I was always like, I mean, come on, Oswald, did he do it? But I was always just kind of like, I don't really care. Like, if the story is more interesting than that, I kind of don't really care. And then I read this because ostensibly I just wanted to know all about the like CIA and the Third World.
I imagine you like innocently buying innocently buying a book about the CIA and its sort of duplicitous activities around the world, and then getting to this point where it's sort of like sort of gradually starts to. There's these little subtle hints thrown in.
Yeah,
Alan Dulles might be
the man on the grassy knoll.
Yeah, yeah, implicated. Well, implicated in the crime of the century, but implicated in coup plots, domestic as well as foreign.
Yeah. Do we need to frame this at all before we start? Because I mean, like, I feel like down the line as this episode unfurls, we'll probably have a discussion about conspiracy theories and what that means to the left and all of that. But I mean, it's kind of a crazy story, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just like insane. I don't know what else to say. It's just nuts.
Yeah. I mean, like a little while ago, I watched Oliver Stone's JFK.
Yeah, I still haven't seen
and then
that.
I was like, basically couldn't sleep for 48 hours. And it's funny how these things captivate people, right? But this is the classic conspiracy theory that inspires like people to go to the internet and do
independent research.
Yes, that's what I was about to say, to become independent researchers. And I feel like the persona of the independent researcher has like fallen into like mucky territory of late. It's become a little bit tarred by
Q.
The
Epstein stuff.
Yeah. But it has a noble lineage, I think.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
The early pioneers of the late 1960s who decided to turn their gaze upon this infamous murder when nobody else was looking.
Yeah.
Nobody else was asking the questions.
Yeah.
Everybody had a puppet string attached from them to Alan Dulles somehow.
I mean, yeah, they make the point in this book. Okay, so for those of you who haven't heard any of our other parts on this book, hi, how's it going? This book is The Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot, and the first part is basically just all about this guy, Alan Dulles, and you've heard Alan Dulles' name. He kind of helped start the CIA, right? He was like kind of pivotal in its early years. Who was he? Second part was like, here's the imperium that they created. Here's all of the, like socialist, third world, democratically elected, not even third world in a lot of cases, like leaders that were assassinated or taken out or couped or whatever by the CIA and why that happened. Third part's just like they killed Kennedy. So like spoiler alerts, yeah, CIA, whatever. But before we get into the story, I think it is just worth kind of lingering on that point just a little bit that you say that like there is a pretty fine line between like conspiracy theory and like conspiracy theory, and obviously everybody is going to say that, like even like Q people are going to be like, yeah, there's conspiracy theory, and then there's like the mole children underneath New York City, like of course. But like I don't know, this book does come across, even with its liberal tendencies, as like well researched and just like outlining a series of events that like I don't know, just like took place. Like I don't know, it comes across as like popular history, and so it falls prey to some of the issues that a lot of pop history does, but also like a couple, like what, 1 to 2 years after Kennedy was shot, like 2/3 of the American population didn't believe the Warren report or whatever. Like it was like immediately afterward, nobody believed it. So like, I don't know. I think we're going to try and parse what is conspiracy theory and what's conspiracy theory.
Yeah. Yeah, if you wanted to like create the ultimate appearance of cover up, you would do the Warren report, right? Yeah. No wonder people were suspicious. And I mean, like, a conspiracy is any more than one person, right? Yeah. If it was anybody other than Oswald acting alone, then it's a conspiracy.
Exactly.
In terms of, like, David Talbot's suggesting that Alan Dulles is the main culprit, and he also points the fingers at some other quite sort of like high-profile persons. He really does paint the picture of a kind of like united faction of American high society realizing that this deed needed to be done, and the number of people who were like involved or like wink wink nudge nudge, this thing needs to happen.
By hook or by crook.
By hook or by crook. It's quite an extensive web that Talbot draws. So it's strange. It's a strange book, really, isn't it? Because he isn't like, here is the scenario. He doesn't like lay out all the pieces around Dealey Plaza and like give the sort of blow by blow chronological timeline. It's more like setting up all of the pictures on the pinboard and like telling you where the string should be, but letting you put the string there yourself, kind of thing. Yeah, and it's almost a little bit like how far do you want to go down this route? Which of these tidbits do you want to decide how much faith you put in? And there are certain circumstantial pieces of evidence. There are certain very concrete pieces of evidence.
There's a bit of
really what it is an argument like of sort of a mass of pieces of evidence, kind of thing. Like the picture is what you see emerging from all of the crazy coincidences, all of the people that happen to be in certain places at certain times, all of the people who actually seem to know certain people, kind of thing. So it's certainly not like concrete, perhaps, or maybe it's a very sort of like, it's the landscape and not the, I don't know. I mean, you finished the metaphor.
No, you're definitely right. Not the details, because like he's not gonna be like, oh, here's the guy's name who was on top of the parking garage. Here's the guy's name who was on top of this building and that building, and here's when they fired the shots at exactly this time. This is where the cartridges fell. What he's doing is basically being like, here's all of the people who really hated Kennedy. Here's what they said, explicitly being like, wow, I wish somebody would kill that guy, and then basically being like, here's a lot of people who were definitely involved. You know what happened from there. Does it matter who was actually on top of the buildings or whatever? But it is, I think, also worth remembering from our last episode on this, the ideology that Talbot's kind of working from, which is that like C. Wright Mills. It seems like he like loves that guy a lot, and C. Wright Mills is definitely like not working from a Marxist tradition. He's working from like a completely new tradition of his own to talk about the power elite and how power works in the United States, and that finds its way into this story about Kennedy, as I think you'll all see. It's not a very like Marxist reading. Hopefully we can kind of try and add something more than like what C. Wright Mills would just say is like, it's the goddamn CIA and the power people. It's like, what do you mean by that? I don't know. So yeah, we just dive into it.
Yeah. I think there's a way to look at it in terms of like sort of means and motive and opportunity kind of structure, I suppose. I had this question that I was asking myself. I was getting toward the end of the book, trying to work out what the entire structural narrative of the book was.
Yeah.
Whether it's like, because I was sort of expecting it to take a hard left turn and suddenly become like a really conspiratorial book, which is what it isn't, kind of thing. But I was trying to work out whether it's this sort of like quite comprehensible, down to earth reading of the infamous activities of the CIA, and equally Alan Dulles' sort of central role in building that institution to operate in the way that we now know that it operated, and sort of showing how that institution and that collection of actors with that person at the helm could go on to potentially perpetrate this murder or series of murders, I suppose. And then also there's the other way of reading it where maybe that whole preamble was just to set up Alan Dulles as somebody who had all of the wherewithal to commit this crime kind of thing. So maybe it was kind of like clothing a conspiracy theory in a sort of academic setting. It's kind of irrelevant, I suppose. But that's all to kind of like set up Alan Dulles' means and capability. He sort of built the network, built the institutions that were able to perpetrate this, and also like was this linking force between all of these different members of American society. And then also there's the kind of like motive, the schism that was emerging in American political life at that period of time kind of thing. So I guess that's my generalized reading of the narrative of the book in general.
No, it's interesting, because we were talking right before this about like what was the author's purpose in writing this book, and I kind of feel like it was he really wanted to talk about Kennedy, but then was like, okay, well, to talk about Kennedy, you need to connect the dots to like the Bay of Pigs. Okay, to talk about the Bay of Pigs, you kind of need to talk about, Fidel, and to talk about all that, you need to talk about, okay, God, we have to talk about the stories of like Mossadegh and about all of these people. And he was like, okay, what's a good way to frame that? Ostensibly writing a biography of Dulles. And so that's kind of what it comes across as, and just like using him as a framing device for all this crazy stuff, which in hindsight, I think is probably a really good idea, because like, as you'll see, Dulles and the CIA are like function as these connections between different points of society and all of the different kind of like, hesitate to use the word class, but like class hierarchies within the CIA are really symbolic of that. So yeah, it's interesting.
I just want to fix my mic.
Oh, by all means.
I'm not quite sure what's happening with it. There we go.
Well, Dan, like all good stories, we start with a man named Dick Drain. And the author, David Talbot, does not make a point to linger on this, but we start with a man whose name is Dick Drain, whose name is Richard Drain, but he introduces himself as Dick Drain. And this is to frame the Bay of Pigs, which is obviously a massive part of the story. Basically, just to sum it up, kind of like CIA organized different paramilitary groups going in to invade Cuba and like take over the island, and that's the story that we're all told in American school, right? It was, it's just this plan gone wrong, and it really embarrassed Kennedy. Let's not talk about it anymore. Moving on. The purpose of bringing it up in this chapter, though, is to kind of say that like there's this interaction between our man Dick Drain, who was like on the ground overseeing things, and Alan Dulles while it's all going down, while the like, pigs are like, on the beach getting like mown down by Fidel's guys. The hogs. Where Dick Drain is saying to Dulles like, damn, things aren't going so hot in Cuba, man. I'm kind of freaking out. Like we kind of messed this one up. And David Talbot like paints this picture of Dulles as like not really caring. And almost like he expected this. And so that kind of sets up like talking all about the Bay of Pigs. Why did Dulles kind of expect this to happen? Was that what he wanted to happen?
Yeah, Dulles, was so often his sort of operational strategy, was on holiday when this whole stuff was going down. And he arrived back at the airport and was picked up by Dick Drain, who had to inform him how disastrously the invasion was going. And as you say, Alan Dulles is, and I mean, I thought it was kind of being like, this was the signs of Alan Dulles kind of losing the plot a bit, not really understanding some degree of senility going on, kind of thing. And Dick Drain kind of wants to take him back to CIA headquarters because it's kind of like, the old man will come and fix everything. Yeah. Like Alan Dulles will sort everything out. Somehow he will like direct from the sidelines his attack, and it will all turn round. And instead, Alan Dulles takes him to his house, and they have whiskey and they chat for a bit. And Dick Drain makes his very, very, very rapid exit because he's really kind of unnerved by the coolness of Alan Dulles. I like the scene that he paints of like the headquarters, the CIA headquarters, when this is all going down. Like he paints a picture of like people in utter despair, people weeping.
Picked a bad day to stop sniffing glue.
Yeah.
People's like,
I just sort of imagine like people, CIA agents, like running around hysterical, sort of like screaming and like waving their hands around and like, I don't know, the whole like it paints it as if their entire reality is coming apart, kind of thing.
Yeah. I would say if you ever were in the CIA headquarters and you were trying to book some vacation time and you saw that Alan Dulles had booked some vacation time, just hide in a bunker for that day. Something bad's gonna happen. But yeah, I mean, he comes to the conclusion pretty quickly that like this was Dulles's plan and that he supposedly set up the Bay of Pigs operation with like he's quoting someone here as saying like C- officers and expendable Cuban puppets, which is pretty classic. So like he set this operation up to fail, and some people kind of beforehand were like, why is he doing this? Again, as you said, like, is he losing the plot? But the purpose is kind of made out to be that Dulles knew that they would get pinned down on the beach, that things would start to go really bad, and that would force newly elected Kennedy's hand to like use the military and the Air Force, because it's the only thing that could save them, to just fully invade Cuba. Mm-hmm. And I don't know my history very well, Dan, but I don't think that happened.
No.
Did those boys ever make it home? I would imagine a lot of them made it home. A lot of them didn't, though.
A lot of them ended up in prisons.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
That's for sure. Yes, exactly. It's an effort on Dulles's part to manipulate the ostensibly naive and weak-willed John F. Kennedy, the incumbent president who's only been in office for a few months. And Alan Dulles, a sort of like veteran statesman, thinks he's going to, this is his opportunity, kind of thing. And yes, it's suggested that contrary to what you were just describing as your sort of high school interpretation of events or high school education interpretation of events, it was known very early on that there was absolutely no way to stage this kind of invasion.
Yeah.
Like it would be rebuffed by the Cuban Defense Forces, but also there really wasn't. I mean, the idea is that it would spark an uprising in Cuba, right?
Yeah.
And I think they kind of knew that there was no real way that that was actually going to happen. Like the likelihood of inspiring some kind of like eruption of civil resistance was far-fetched. And as soon as it was realized it was far-fetched, this other sort of strategy was hatched, which was, can we spark an actual military invasion? And, I mean, and as you say, that did not happen.
Yeah.
The weak-willed Kennedy was not as easily duped as Dulles thought that he might be.
Yeah.
And this was the sort of like seeds of the resentment that began to build between the sort of like defense and sort of economic establishment in America and the incumbent administration, made up of what's described as new frontiersmen, these people who were from a different generation, from different echelons of American society, who had won this almost shock victory in the 1960 election and taken over the White House.
Yeah. And I mean, to a certain extent, it is like, oh, props to Kennedy for not destroying the island and invading it, because like most people around his like advisory table or whatever were like it was like Curtis LeMay. Yeah. Go back to our McNamara episode to hear us talk all great things about Curtis LeMay, but like he was like, okay, invade the island, kill everybody, bomb the Soviet Union, bring out the nukes, baby. It's all going to be great. We got to get there fast.
There was a bit that induced an audible laugh from me when I was reading this book when Kennedy describes LeMay as what, deranged or a lunatic or something for his like, well, it's coming back to the nuclear brinksmanship of John Foster Dulles kind of thing. Like LeMay was just committed to having it out with the Soviets. Yeah. And every time Kennedy seemingly passed up the opportunity to have nuclear apocalypse,
baby.
It was apparently something that was wrong with Kennedy and not with the deranged mindset of Curtis LeMay.
Yeah, I saw some badass footage recently of post-Cuban Revolution of people going around ripping down not just American flags, but also like, I don't remember exactly what companies it was, but like, like DuPont or United Fruit Company, like banners and like ripping out all of their decals on the factories and stuff. I was just like, hell yeah. So, I mean, that's a huge part of it too, right? We'll come to a specific group of brothers down the line in this episode when we talk about people who lost their property. But among the American like ruling class,
I love that shit.
yeah, among the American ruling class, there was like a huge, not just like the obvious anti-communist shit, but there was a like, hey, we got our property stolen. That was our property in Cuba. So it wasn't just like defense contractors and like actual defense guys like LeMay. Who just wanted to like bomb, destroy. This is like a huge military threat. We need to get rid of it before they destroy Florida. But yeah, so that was in April 1961. And I mean, I talked about this on one of the last episodes as saying like, Kennedy, dude, you show up in this hostile like government. You need to get rid of everybody. And like huge mistake, obviously. I mean, he died because of it. Like huge mistake on his part, not getting rid of like everybody and starting completely fresh. He wanted to have this whole like horseshoe theory, both sides, listen to both people. Okay, I'm a liberal. Oh, okay, Curtis LeMay, yeah, we'll have him on for a while. Eventually, he realizes he needs to get rid of a lot of these people.
It's called the liberals' gambit, and it always fails.
The liberals' gambit, baby. Eventually, he realizes he needs to get rid of a lot of these people, but doesn't do it very well. He gets rid of LeMay, which is great. And eventually, he does get rid of Dulles. But there's a famous quote from him that you always hear, like, independent researchers say, that I'm just going to repeat because I feel like by law I have to do this when you're talking about an Alan Dulles conspiracy theory JFK assassination podcast episode, where this is Kennedy talking. He says, I probably made a mistake keeping Alan Dulles on. I've never worked with him, and therefore I can't estimate his meaning when he tells me things. Dulles is a legendary figure, and it's hard to operate with legendary figures. It's a hell of a way to learn things, but if I've learned one thing from this business, it's that we're going to have to eventually deal with the CIA. And then he goes on to say, we need to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the wind. And it's interesting, right? Because Kennedy kind of comes across as like, he takes the blame for the Bay of Pigs to a certain extent. And I think that's really interesting. Well, now that I think about it, maybe it's not interesting because if you kind of came out and said, damn, I'm not in control of my government, that's just like some like wild like Wall Street guys, probably wouldn't have been a good look.
No. Yeah. I mean, that's the beginnings of the resentment in the Kennedy administration that he is forced to have to take the blame for this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And covers for the CIA and covers for Dulles and keeps Dulles on for a little while because he kind of has to. But this is the beginnings of the realization that he'd made a mistake keeping Dulles on for one, and he also he needed to get rid of him pretty quickly.
Yeah, and also that like I think it seems like he was still operating under the assumption that the CIA is just what Truman set it up to be, which is just it will give me information, and then they're like, yo, we killed Patrice Lumumba, and like, you remember all that other crazy stuff that happened right before he got into office? That was us too. And he's like, oh, we need to deal with this really quickly.
Yeah. For people who don't remember or haven't listened to our last episode, the CIA knew that Patrice Lumumba was dead and kept Kennedy in the dark about it for at least a month before it happened, and basically executed Lumumba upon orders that were given by Eisenhower at the end of his administration, even though Kennedy had basically just come into office kind of thing. So there was already this effort to conduct operations in a clandestine way behind the back of the president. And then it fed into, obviously, the Bay of Pigs. And we could also talk about... Do you want to talk about France? Because...
Let's talk about France real quick. I do just want to re-mention two really famous pieces of American media which come directly out of the Lumumba assassination. The day that he was assassinated was the day that Eisenhower gave that fucking anti-defense, like, what's it called? The like defense machine, military-industrial complex, and he was like, "They're gonna start doing some crazy things if you don't get rid of him." He had literally that day given the order for Patrice Lumumba to be killed, and then the famous photo of Kennedy with his head in his hands on the phone. That was him on the phone with whoever told him, "Hey, they killed Lumumba." Just so Let's talk about happier things.
Let's talk about efforts at coups in France.
So yeah, just real quick. That was April 1961, Bay of Pigs. April 1961 in France was, like, I think crazier.
I had no idea going into this that there was a failed coup attempt
against de Gaulle
in France in the early 60s from disgruntled military
Fascists.
Yeah, fascists, I guess. I guess so. Yeah, people who were irked by de Gaulle's desire to pull out of Algeria, after having committed to keeping Algeria as part of France. De Gaulle was now realizing that he was going to have to pull out of it, basically, and military forces and a particular general in Algeria started to conspire against de Gaulle, and were well on their way to executing a coup plot. And if anything, if they'd acted faster, they probably would have succeeded. But
Typical
they dallied in a lot of ways, and de Gaulle was able to, I suppose, rally the French people to resist this coup attempt.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, de Gaulle's career is really interesting, and I think worth pausing on, because it's like, he was the leader of like Free France or whatever, like what wasn't Nazi France during the war. And then like he kind of takes charge of things, and he like kind of sorts some stuff out after the war, and then he just kind of disappears for a lot of the 50s to go write his memoirs, which again, typical France, I think is very classic. And then he comes back because there's a huge constitutional crisis, and then this is post that constitutional crisis when he's in power again, because everyone's like, oh, who can we turn to? Let's just go to de Gaulle. He'll figure everything out. I don't know. I'm too tired. Let's just go to de Gaulle. And
it's lunchtime. We need a president.
Yeah. Boudrin president. We love the French. It's just the English rubbing off on me being mean to the French, but French people are very cool. So yeah, and then de Gaulle, very flip-floppy on the Algerian question. Makes it seem like, no, we're never going to pull out of Algeria. And then it's like, as things get worse and worse and worse and more people die, and it's like, guys, Algeria would really like to be free. Then he's like, okay, fine, we'll do it. But then like there's no real plan right away for what's going to happen. And so yeah, as you say, this guy whose name was Maurice Schaal, who was like one of the French generals, they like take power of Algeria, and they like fully take over Algeria for a period, and they land troops just outside of Paris in these forests, and everybody just panics. And it was funny because I looked up de Gaulle's famous speech that night where he's like, I need everybody in France to like help out, otherwise things are going to be really bad and I'll be dead tomorrow morning. And I looked it up and I was like, oh, here it is. I found the video. And then I turned it on and he starts talking. I was like, I don't speak French. I don't know what he's talking about.
I'm sure it sounded inspiring then.
Oh, it sounded great. It sounded so great. But yeah, the story about how like de Gaulle was able to, and the French people were able to like fend off this fascist attempted like coup is really, really fascinating, because like basically everybody, first of all, there's a general strike that's organized, which, who organized the general strike? Was it the liberal French government? No, it was the Communist Party and the labor unions. Thank you very much, guys, for not allowing fascism in France. Also, just like, that's cool, because like de Gaulle, liberal, but they're like, I mean, what's better? Like, come on, organize a strike. This would be very bad if they got into power. Very cool.
This is a threat to democracy. No,
Yeah,
we are
exactly.
at least
Yeah.
supporters of the
Yeah.
the democracy and the constitution.
Yeah, so good for them. And they basically organize people to just like general strike, and everybody like go park your cars on the runways where these people are going to land, barricade all the streets, don't let them into France. And then just kind of eventually it fizzles out because de Gaulle actually like sends some people to go kidnap all of the leaders and like bring them back to Paris. And without the leaders, it all just kind of fizzles out. It's also very classic because it wasn't Talbot brings up a like bit about Maurice Schaal, like was it him running away where he's like going to his plane and he like trips on the steps and like falls over in a comical face plant?
I thought it was the other way around. I thought he'd been captured. He surrenders and is brought back to Paris, and then he stumbles down. Like added to the long list of people who have stumbled down airplane
steps.
Off steps, I suppose. When the cameras are rolling, like he stumbled at the bottom, I think.
That's so funny.
Yeah. I think he was given a very lenient prison sentence, wasn't he?
Yeah, 15 years. And, like, I don't know if he actually served that. De Gaulle should have shot him. I'm just going to say that. It was also interesting because de Gaulle is, like, at one point talking that night when they're like, oh, man, this could be really bad. De Gaulle's talking with his, like, second in command or whatever, and is like, damn, so what do you think's going to happen? And I find it really funny because I thought, like, the second in command started getting, like, going way too much into detail about what he'd do if he was, like, Maurice Schaal. And he's like, well, you know, I'd come in here and I'd make you run down the steps and I'd shoot you in the back to make it seem like you're running away. And I just got the image of de Gaulle being like, I don't need this much information. Thanks a lot, man. But yeah, needless to say, de Gaulle's able to take power back, or I guess just keep power. But the reason that our good friend David Talbot brings this up is because he makes the point that, like, this wasn't so much about Algeria. Like, this wasn't so much about these people keeping power of Algeria. It was actually about NATO and about U.S. ambitions for NATO and about de Gaulle realizing that if France stayed in NATO and gave all of its troops power, or like command of his troops to NATO, that would basically just mean giving it to America. And America, through NATO, wanted France to have a nuclear arsenal that it could use, and de Gaulle really didn't want this. He was like, this is a horrible idea. So Talbot makes the point that like there might have been a little bit of American intelligence involved in this coup, which is less than ideal, I suppose.
It's always less than ideal. Yeah, and there's also the suggestion that there was this fear that by leaving Algeria, they would leave Algeria to the communists, and it would become this sort of like
That's a bit of a jump.
communist bastion. But yeah, that's always but that's always the boogeyman scenario of these sort of like spooks.
Yeah. Have you seen the posters, the UK posters during the Troubles of like a hammer and sickle over Ireland, and it's like, if we let the IRA win, they'll bring communism into the UK. And
I have
like,
not seen those, but I
They're
will
awesome.
look them up. So yeah, CIA involved in this coup attempt in France, and once again dropping Kennedy in it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, leaving him red-faced and embarrassed and having to deny any involvement, but also like having to acknowledge to some extent that the CIA had been involved, and like basically adding further impetus and evidence to the fact that he was going to have to take action on this.
Yeah.
And also further adding to de Gaulle's sort of clear-mindedness about how threatening the CIA was, both to America and to the world, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, and it seems like de Gaulle, he paints the picture that de Gaulle just knew that this was the CIA, at least to a certain extent. There's, at one point he says in some of his war memoirs, de Gaulle accused Dulles of being part of a scheme that was determined to silence or set aside the old French general. Kind of a classic. Pierre de Benneville, a right-wing resistance leader in Dulles's OSS payroll, was later accused of betraying Jean Moulin, a de Gaulle's dashing representative in the French underground, to the Gestapo. After he was captured, he was beaten to death by Klaus Barbie. That's kind of like, oh, geez. One thing I think that's interesting about this made me think to an earlier part of the book when Dulles is at a dinner party and they're talking about someone at the dinner party is like, can you please kill Nasser for me in Egypt? And there's the really interesting bit where he's like, well, we could, but that wouldn't be easy because we'd have to find someone who's not an outsider, who's kind of a little bit crazy and very extreme and radical, and they would have to do it for us. And I thought that was an interesting parallel to like the French coup, because it wasn't that like this had nothing to do with Algeria, and it wasn't that this was like all to do with NATO. It was definitely that like this, the CIA people who were involved in this kind of like went up to this guy, what was his name? Maurice Schall, and all of his cronies, and were like, yeah, it kind of sucks that Algeria is like getting taken away from you, huh? And like, hey, we kind of have some similar interests. And it's like, it really made me think that this whole coup is just very similar to that. Like, you need to find someone who's an extremist, who's on the inside to kind of like accomplish your goals for you. Typical CIA stuff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Really,
I mean, yeah, it's very similar to what happened in the Congo, what happened in Iran, I suppose, where like you find forces who are willing to ally with you and then supply them the means to execute the coup on your behalf, kind of thing.
Yeah. One thing that we'll see is that Kennedy. We should also say, I suppose, that Kennedy did offer to help de Gaulle to a certain extent. De Gaulle was like, not only is that like kind of an empty offer because you can't actually help me because that would mean like completely undermining everything that like you supposedly like are in control of your government, et cetera, et cetera. But he was like, I'll just deal with this on my own. But it's also interesting because Kennedy definitely found himself in a similar situation in terms of like elements within his government not taking his orders and at like times directly disobeying them. And operating towards completely different ends. But it's interesting because we see that like de Gaulle, like he demonstrated that he was definitely willing to like fight fire with fire, you know what I mean? And like there's a point in this book where Talbot talks about how de Gaulle like hired a bunch of like ex-Vietnamese exiles to go and just blow up cafes in Algeria where he knew that like these fascists would be meeting, that they would like kidnap these guys, they'd assassinate some of them. You do not see Kennedy's government doing that. I'm not saying that that was like the way out of it or like what he should have done, but de Gaulle managed to stay in power and Kennedy didn't. Funny how things like that work. We should also say that after the Algiers putsch, there were like a number of times where de Gaulle was nearly assassinated in very similar ways that Kennedy wound up being assassinated. Talbot brings up a point where like He's driving in a car in a parade with his wife, and they go around a hairpin turn, and a bunch of people open up on him, and they all miss, which is crazy. It was just fucking
Thanks
insane.
to the skills of the driver, they managed to get away, really.
Yeah.
Or, it's incredibly lucky that de Gaulle is unharmed in that attack.
Yeah.
An attack which it's very easy to point fingers at the French equivalent to the CIA having had involvement in anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some of these same characters will pop up later on, kind of thing.
Yeah.
We'll get to it when there are French Secret Service agents, for whatever better of a phrase.
Wandering around Dallas.
Yeah, I happen to be in Texas at a period of time. But I don't know, that's not necessarily surprising because, or it's not necessarily suspicious because it just seems like everybody was in Dallas.
Yeah, that's true.
In
It was just a
November of
time to be in
63. It
Dallas.
was just a time to be in Dallas.
It's like, hey, Nixon's in Dallas. Let's go hang out with Nixon. He's fun. Said nobody ever. All right. So then, Kennedy is like, I'm going to do something typical liberal, does the half-hearted, I'll just fire Dulles and everything will be okay. And he doesn't, he goes through and he purges a number of people from the CIA.
Yeah, it's mostly people who were directly involved in the Bay of Pigs.
Yeah.
They're kind of gone.
Which is if that was Dulles playing 3D chess again. Oh my God.
Well, Dulles wanted, because by being absent at the time of the Bay of Pigs attack and also by putting all these sort of C-list agency people in charge, he was hoping that the hammer would, or the dagger, I suppose, the sword would fall on other people.
Yeah.
But Kennedy
also fell
sorts
on
through
him.
that quite easily and was like,
Yeah.
no, we have to get rid of you. And he eventually was removed, but it wasn't the cleaning of house that should have happened, and I think Kennedy knew needed to happen, and there were efforts made to do that, but that effort was stalled, kind of thing. So there were only a few sort of top-ranking people who were removed, Alan Dulles included. But then, in the efforts to find a replacement for Dulles, Kennedy ends up settling on somebody who was already a CIA insider who was I think he was a bit of a step removed from Dulles, but definitely
He's one of the boys.
one of the boys, one of the agency boys. There's this period of time when Kennedy's policy toward these kind of activities is that it's suggested to be one whereby he's trying to get liberals to do conservative things and conservatives to do liberal things.
Yeah.
And you can definitely sort of see what's happening here. They're sort of putting a conservative figure in position, but think they're going to be able to work with him or work around him to affect this sweeping change of the CIA that never actually materializes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because it's still the same
There was a
organ.
point in time when he was contemplating putting his brother in charge of the CIA.
Oh my God, dude! Alternate history. Oh my God. Bobby Kennedy's like, we're going after the unions big time.
I don't know. I get the impression John F. Kennedy would have put Bobby Kennedy in charge of just about everything. If he could handle the workload.
There's something cool about that. I don't know. It's just sweet. It's very sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God. There's so much crap. There's so much crap to get through. So basically, a year goes by between.
Alan Dulles leaves office on my birthday.
Oh yeah, on
in
Dan's
November.
birthday. Oh
in
my
the
God.
November of 61.
Yeah. Dan's birthday,
28.
November 61. It's the day Dan was born.
I suppose maybe I was born on the date in which Alan Dulles left office. Okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't my birthday then, but I was like, oh, okay.
You have a good birthday. Yeah. I share a birthday with Harry Truman, who weirdly comes across well in this book, which he did not come across well. Yeah. So happy birthday.
Mm-hmm.
Year goes by. That was November 61. Year goes by. Now we're in October of 62. What happened in October of 62? It was...
I don't know, not very much at all.
Yeah, it's just the time that everybody on the planet almost died and everything was destroyed. Cuban Missile Crisis. So Cuban Missile Crisis, I kind of, when in high school when we learned about it, I was like, come on, we couldn't have actually come that close. How close could it have been? This is history. Come on. This wouldn't have happened. That would have been too wild. And it's funny because I also remember, I have asked my grandparents about this, and they, I don't know if it's just because they were on the other side of the country and they weren't really near Florida and they were just kind of like, I don't care. But they kind of were like, didn't seem like anything was actually going to happen. This book makes it seem like things came very close. As in our McNamara episode, we talked about this as things coming extremely close to nuclear apocalypse. But this, for a number of reasons, made it seem extremely close to happening.
Yeah, I've always thought that all of the kind of alternate history speculation that one comes across from time to time was some degree of hysteria. I was always a bit like, is it really possible that we would
In a way
have come
of bigging
close
up Kennedy.
to? Sorry.
It's a way of like building up Kennedy too.
Yeah, well, is that not what we're about to do now?
Sure.
Yeah, this idea that it's a miracle that the human race survived the 20th century and we were ever that close to like nuclear apocalypse. But I now sort of like now willing to join the speculation that sort of says like, if it hadn't been Kennedy in charge in America and it hadn't been Khrushchev in charge in the USSR, if they couldn't have worked out this, come to some kind of degree of détente, if they hadn't have had this dialogue that developed through this period and degree of mutual respect that developed through this period, and knowing what I now know of the kind of characters that were involved in Eisenhower's administration, John Foster Dulles amongst many other luminaries, and the continued centrality of people like Curtis LeMay into this, the Kennedy administration, and the degree of zealous commitment to the idea of having it out with the Russians and having doing a nuclear war.
Yeah, exactly. We're just gonna have it out with the Russians and launch all of the nuclear weapons.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's just sort of gentlemanly combat.
It's insane. We'll exchange swords at the end. I think the thing that blew my mind most about this, because in the McNamara movie, they just kind of made it seem like Kennedy was the level-headed one, and like Khrushchev was like huffing Febreze, trying to get through the day and like freaking out. They both seemed very level-headed, but the craziest thing was that like during the Bay of Pigs crisis, the CIA was organizing and implementing, or not Bay of
during
Pigs.
During the Cuban Missile Crisis.
During the Cuban
During this
crisis.
entire period of time, the CIA was permanently organizing invasions of Cuba.
Exactly.
Just get a boat full of lads, sending them over.
But that's the thing. It's like during the missile crisis, it's like they were just with boats going by and just strafing villages, and it's like, wow, that is not helping. It's like in history class, you learn about like the goddamn Cubans already had missiles there, and they were being so sneaky and duplicitous. It's like we were like shooting their people while this nuclear like confrontation brinksmanship was happening. It's like, it is crazy that someone wasn't just like, fuck it, launch the missiles.
Yeah, Cuba, what, like 20 miles off the Florida coast?
Yeah.
Like, make yourself central to the Cold War, by all means. Like, don't be peripheral. If you're peripheral, then you get knocked off.
Yeah,
like,
for sure. Yeah, that's good advice for people 70 years ago. Make yourself peripheral.
I mean, we've talked about this in the past. The quid pro quo arrangement that was come to that caused the cessation of this crisis, I suppose. The realization was made that America had nuclear warheads in Turkey, and they were equally irksome to the USSR as the idea of having nuclear warheads in Cuba was to
Understandable.
the US. What I didn't know was that Kennedy had already ordered these nuclear weapons removed from Turkey, and it was another way in which he had been snubbed or completely disregarded by the military and defense establishment, or another example of how he was not in total or even in any control of these apparatuses.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Which just makes it all the more crazy. It's like, oh man, I would have been one of those people with like bury a container out back in my yard during this week. I'm just gonna go live in there, eat my beans.
I mean, you're halfway there already.
I'm halfway there already with my broad beans. Yeah, so that was nuts, and that was a bit of a stressful period for Kennedy and the Kennedy administration, but they come out the other side of it, which is impressive, and the world comes out the other side of it. Eventually, we're going to have to talk about Kennedy as a person and about how, like, none of this is meant to, like, big him up and to make him seem like... Because this book does really fall victim to, like, the legend of the Kennedys. It's like the damned generation of, like, people who, you know, goddamn, if only they hadn't died, we would have had the perfect liberal democracy, which is, of course, crap. Yeah. Because people are all, like, when we were talking about doing this episode, we were like, I mean, do we just frame this entirely as, like, the bourgeoisie fighting the bourgeoisie? Because it's like, if you frame it like that, like, who cares? You know what I mean? It's like, wow, they killed one of their own. I really don't care. To a certain extent, this whole story is that. It's also just insane. Yeah. So it's just fun to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're quite right to say that and to insert that now. We were discussing this beforehand, weren't we? That this book really fixates on both both ideological but also material incentives or motivations for this wide array of establishment figures in America pitching themselves against the Kennedys and the Kennedy administration, like circling sharks to some extent, trying to work out who was going to do the deed, egging each other on. And the way I guess I decided to think about it, I suppose, and with this prompting of you suggesting that maybe this was just the bourgeoisie taking out one of their own kind of thing, or this sort of inter-class conflict, was to begin thinking about it in terms of the reading we did.
Mike Davis. God damn it.
Yeah, the Mike Davis reading that we did, which was all about the inter-bourgeoisie the different factions of the capitalist class that were sort of vying for political power later on, but basically from Nixon onwards kind of thing, or from Goldwater almost, or even through this entire period. How they represented various factions. But what you don't really get in this book is you get lots of things saying, here are the material interests of Alan Dulles and his like fellow Wall Street lawyers, but also all of the kind of like luminaries of American capitalism. Here are their material interests, both foreign and domestic, that would lead them to potentially contemplate the requirement of removing a sitting president. But you don't really get very much from the other side of like what the Kennedys' class position was, what their sort of like material interests were, what section of American society they represented. So going forward from doing this podcast, I'd certainly like to like look into the Kennedys a little bit, look into kind of like material basis of their wealth, but also the factions of capital that they drew support from.
Yeah, because I mean, they just kind of seem to be like they have a lot of social capital. Like that's like they hang out at the expensive resorts, and it's the Kennedys. Oh yeah, so we'll see them at Cape Cod. Or whatever.
This is the thing we were talking about before. Like I always assumed they were like descendants of an ancient lineage of immigrants to America, kind of thing, going back all the way to the sort of pre-revolutionary times, kind of thing. But that's not the case. I mean, all 8 of his great-grandparents were immigrants from Ireland, is that right?
That's why it was such a big deal.
Yeah.
Well, not only he was Catholic, but he was also just like kind of an immigrant, you know? And I mean, like, one of the reasons it's so hard to pin down, like, what element of what faction of capital he represented was because, like, the way they got all their money was because his dad was just a criminal. Like, his dad was like a prohibition, like, booze, smuggling, like, crook. And so it's like he couldn't really openly be like, this is, we all like the Kennedys because he's part of this faction of capital, because that faction of capital was like illegal, So instead they cultivate this persona, which is this air of celebrity prestige, for sort of carries them through life. Maybe that's something that damned them too, which is interesting. I mean, if we really want to have
maybe
like,
they have no connection kind of thing.
Yeah, and there was no one to like protect them within the bourgeoisie, I guess.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thought.
Yeah. What's the word? Paceless cosmopolitans? Rootless cosmopolitans?
Cosmopolitans, nonetheless. Yeah. He's certainly sipping on a lot of them. Was it in this where they talk all about his back pain and about how it's like poor Kennedy?
Yeah, that was in the sections that we read for the last episode that we did on this book, but we didn't really cover it. Yeah, I had no idea that he had this sort of issue with his back that was so debilitating at times. I think the first time Alan Dulles met Kennedy, it was like pre-hit when he was still a senator or a congressman, and he was like recuperating from another bout of whatever it was that was affecting his back. So he was sort of like bedridden and what have you.
Bad back.
And I think Dulles quite liked Kennedy initially, or at least had this sense of like admiration of him, I suppose.
Or someone to be used, maybe too.
Perhaps. I mean, when it comes to Alan Dulles, you can never know what it is that's going. Well, you can presume what is going through his head is, I like you because you seem useful to me, and then as soon as you are revealed not to be useful or actively my adversary, then things turn murderous.
Yeah. Ha 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 ha. I'm gonna turn on the light before we continue.
It's Friday night again, so if you can hear the bells ringing, it's because it's bell ringing practice once again.
In England, it is the English bell ringing.
We've been doing so much podcasting of late, I've literally no idea what Friday it is. Anything could be happening right now, but Yeah.
It's in a long. We're releasing this episode in a long time.
Yeah. There's no point in me telling you what date it is. It will bear no relevance.
It's bell ringing day.
It's bell ringing day. Yeah. I mean, we're painting the most sort of cliche picture of England. Yeah, opposite an ancient church.
Yeah, above a pub.
With the bell ringing practice on a Friday night. And then down to the pub for a pint of warm ale.
Exactly. This is how our ancestors did it, Dan. There was bell ringing practice on Fridays, also known as the Lord's podcasting day.
Did you come to England like fully expected to find yourself in the Shire, or did it just happen?
Yeah, I did.
Okay,
and I kind of found it because like this is a very stereotypically like British town. It's got the big Union Jack. It's got the towers. It's got like I was like, oh, this must be what the entire country is like.
Don't go to the Midlands.
Yeah, true. Yeah, Milton Keynes. I hear it's not very Shire-esque.
You might run into one famous graphic novelist.
Ah, yes, true. Yeah,
Is that Milton
it's in
Keynes?
Northampton.
Oh, Northampton. Bollocks.
Yeah.
Scratch that.
Don't
go looking for Alan Moore in Milton Keynes.
Yeah, exactly. I went to Nottingham not too long ago, and I was expecting to find what I found, which was statues of Robin Hood everywhere, and towers, and
Games Workshop has its headquarters in Nottingham, and there is a big statue of a space marine.
Really?
So you could have seen that.
Oh, that would have been much cooler. God damn it. Yeah, Nottingham, cool place. There's also somewhere else that I went recently that was cool. Oh, that's York.
York?
Already talked about it.
We've talked about that.
Already talked
Moving
about
on.
York. Moving on.
I've not been anywhere cool recently.
Oh Christ, where do we start with this? The Cuban Missile Crisis, that was October of '62. Just gonna kind of scroll back here because there is a kind of a telling quote where somebody's corresponding with Nixon, who keeps poking his filthy little disgusting head up in this entire book.
Yeah.
Where it says
The scoundrel of American history.
Oh, the scoundrel of all scoundrels.
Yeah.
The quote is, Dulles' old friend Bill Pauley, the right-wing Miami entrepreneur, which, you don't want that as your tagline, right-wing Miami entrepreneur. That's like everything bad. Who had long collaborated on secret CIA missions, was also warned about his involvement in the Exile Raids. So Exile Raids, he's basically saying like these groups like Alpha 66, who were like paramilitary groups organized by the CIA, who were like without the okay of the government just raiding Cuba. But he remained defiant, hatching a plot so ambitious that he claimed it would bring down Kennedy himself. In April, Bill Pauley wrote a long letter to his political comrade, Tricky Dick Nixon, declaring, quote, all of the Cubans and most of the Americans in this part of the country believe that to remove Castro, you must first remove Kennedy, and that's not going to be easy. So that's kind of like put in the book to try and be like this dun 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 dun, like everybody around in the political establishment and in the underworld and in everywhere all wanted Kennedy dead, baby. They all wanted to kill him. Might well have been the case, but I also feel like a lot of the wording in this is just like, remove Kennedy. That might just be like, get him impeached. That might just be like, elect somebody else in the future. And there's a little bit of slippage there because it's really hard to tell who was like really involved. Like, why was Nixon in Dallas on that day? That's never really like cleared up. Like, I don't know. So moving forward, there's going to be a little bit of slippage between like the people who are actually involved, because I think what we're about to talk about is like the day that Kennedy was killed, and the people who were like involved. So, we'll see.
Yeah. Every time somebody says Kennedy ought to be taken out,
yeah,
you don't necessarily know what they're saying.
They're like, I guess we could run a different Democrat.
But a lot of people were clearly fantasizing about it.
Sure. Yeah,
I mean, the purpose of all of this really is to paint how deep a schism there was between the Kennedys and basically the rest of American society for the most part.
Yeah.
And a consensus was emerging that they had a problem.
Yeah. Because it wasn't just the military types, the LeMays and everybody. Again, as we've said, like, it was like Kennedy and his brother, because his brother was Attorney General at this point, were like doing some, what we would now call very progressive stuff. What back then was just kind of like, hey, remember the New Deal? That was kind of cool. Let's kind of try and get back to doing some of that. So yeah, I mean, like, what were some of the things they did? They started putting tariffs on steel or like just antitrust suits.
Yeah, there was a period of time when he developed this very extensive sort of corporatist deal between the trade unions and the government and the major steel manufacturers to set prices and wages and basically like do classic corporatist politics, right? Like you agree a détente between the various factions, the representative labor and the representatives of capital. And then the CEO or whatever of the biggest steel firm in America a few days later turned around and actually was like, no, we're going to go totally against this thing that we've just agreed and slap this massive price increase on steel, which would have had this massive trickle down inflationary effect in the entirety of the American economy and led to like price rises for consumers. And I can't remember whether it was Kennedy himself or whether he set his like chief enforcer Bobby to work twisting arms and basically like resisting this effort from Steele to go against this deal that they just struck. And in the process, he did successfully manage to force certain steel firms to commit to not raising tariffs. And eventually this trickled down to the point where that sort of chief antagonist was forced to do the same kind of thing. So basically the Kennedy administration like strong-armed American steel into complying with their sort of like corporatist vision of how American capital and labor and government were going to relate kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%.
So that was one of the first kind of like warning signs to American capital, I suppose. There were also significant ways in which they began to be irksome to American oil firms. Is that right? Part of it was this sort of built-up resentment that Cuban oil fields or oil refineries had been lost. But there was also a point in time when Bobby Kennedy was going around actively advocating like newly independent countries to, I can't remember which country it was in particular, but to nationalize their oil firms or oil reserves, which further
in Bolivia. And they, well, no, it wasn't necessarily.
It was somewhere in South
Bolivia.
America, but I can't remember which country it was.
Yeah. But in Bolivia, I know that this blew my mind. They were like selling equipment to recently nationalized mines in Bolivia. Like, can you imagine an American president doing that now? They'd be like blown up by Dick Cheney immediately.
It's like an American president like buying Cuban oil or something.
Or even like to Allende, like 10 years later. That would have been insane. Yeah.
Maybe we are wrong and we should fall for the Kennedy mystique.
The Kennedys. Well, I mean, the way I think about it is like the Eisenhower years were such a bit of a reaction to the New Deal that like everybody I think probably got really comfortable with like the red hunting and the McCarthyism and like the new right-wing policies that the government hadn't had in a really long time, that like they must have all thought, oh, well, that shit's all gone. We're not being progressive anymore. We're done. And then this guy poked his head up and was like, we're going to make some money by selling stuff to Bolivia. And they were like, whoa, buddy. I don't know if you're going to do that.
Yeah. I guess it's worth thinking back to the Mike Davis again, where the factional schism in American capital at that time was like, whether you adhered to the New Deal or whether you wanted to go back to before the New Deal and sort of like recreate the sort of libertarian, freewheeling capitalist days of the like 20s kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we know that like someone like Nixon was initially part of the anti-New Deal bloc, and then when he became president sort of made this massive about face and became a sort of loose advocate for a continuation of New Deal policies to some extent, and it would take a little while longer for the anti-New Deal factions to really get a grip on American politics.
Yeah,
thinking of Reagan and that kind of thing.
Sure.
But you can see it shining through here a little bit. That schism still existing, and I guess you're quite important. Right to point out that these things, which kind of appear really radical for American politics now, were actually only a continuation of like FDR and Truman, right? Which was only what Truman was 8 years before left office, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's very odd to put ourselves in that mindset back then, I think, because I don't know. I think of like Kennedy and FDR as being separated by like a million years.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like 20. You know, it's insane.
Yeah. I always find that quite difficult. Like the sort of like conceptual fantasy idea about what the mid 40s were like and the 60s like just seems so radically different that you sort of forget how different they were. And I always do that with like thinking about my parents' generation and putting them in proximity to the end of the First World War kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
It's actually really the Second World War, rather.
Like, how old are
your parents? Were that old?
Dan was born in 1961, as we said. But and then another thing that he did, which doesn't need any explanation, was raise taxes on the wealthiest part of society. So like that obviously didn't make anybody happy either, because they're like, wait a minute, we got used to not having to do this. It's also funny because it's like you're saying that about 20 years between them. It's like It's 40 years between us and Reagan. That doesn't feel like Reagan's, that shadow of that time period feels like not that long ago.
Yeah.
For some reason, Reagan feels closer in time than George H.W. Bush. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because maybe he looms a little bit larger, 2 terms. I don't know. Nobody really talks about H.W. as being.
Oh,
like,
I see what you mean. Yeah.
wish we still had
what is
him.
HW's legacy other than
the Gulf
George
War.
W.
George W.
Yeah.
Bush, yeah. And being a fucking CIA scumbag.
Uh-huh.
Insane. After reading this, that the like guy in charge of the CIA went on to become president. That's like, whoa. No
And
good.
the CIA's man in the Senate went on to become head of the CIA, then went back to become president again.
Yeah. And then another former president, a guy who was on the Warren Commission. We'll get to that.
When was HW in charge of the CIA then? It must have been in the 70s, right? Before he became vice president in 80.
Yes,
80,
it must have been, yeah. I think it was only for like a year or something.
Oh, right, okay.
I think they were like, we have different plans for you.
I bet he still gets the CIA briefing.
Oh, of course.
Is he alive still? He died recently.
No, he died.
He died
He
recently.
decomposed on camera.
Well, I can think of some people who are decomposing on camera that are still alive.
Yeah, true. I watched a David Attenborough thing recently, speaking of that. Great.
I wasn't thinking of David Attenborough.
Okay.
I was
Salt of the
thinking of our good friend Henry Kissinger.
That is like an affront to God that he is still alive. That's like, talk about people from a different era. I mean, my man. And also, oh no, I almost said the guy that we killed.
Oh yeah, Rumsfeld.
Rumsfeld. I almost said Rumsfeld.
Yeah, we also
And I was like,
Rumsfeld
he's
was a different
dead.
era, but actually there's a point in this where he seeks out Dulles and they meet, don't they? In the
Yeah.
early 60s,
Man, I
when he was a
wonder-
congressman or something.
Yeah, I wonder, man, the power dynamics, alternate history, if Dulles survived longer between like Cheney and Rumsfeld would have been nuts. And Bush. Although I guess he liked Bush to a certain extent because he liked his dad. Okay. Let's talk about something more sane. Let's talk about the first failed assassination attempt of John F. Kennedy. So this book brings up the point that on November 2nd, 1963, our good friend John F. Kennedy was going to...
Chicago?
Yeah, he was in Chicago. What was it, for like a soccer game or something? Or like he was on his way to some sporting event or some crap, or he's coming back from it. Who cares? And...
Unless it's baseball.
Unless it's baseball. It could have been baseball, actually. Oh my God, dude. The MLB just did that. Have you ever seen Field of Dreams? There's no way you've seen
It's Kurt Russell.
It's no, it's the guy who looks just like him. He's white, same thing.
Is it the guy that played the district attorney in Oliver Stone's?
Haven't seen it, but Kevin Costner. It was Kevin Costner. Yeah.
Field of Dreams is often on Netflix. I like sports movies.
Yeah,
I really
sure.
like sports movies,
Oh,
and
it's
it's
worth
one that I
watching.
intend to watch. It comes on and off of Netflix, and I haven't got around to watching it yet.
Yeah.
Were you going to advocate for my watching Field of Dreams?
I
or
was
not?
just gonna say the MLB just did this thing to like to market only to like old white boomers, where they like have the baseball
Their
field from
constituency.
that show. Yeah, exactly. Made up in real life, and it's in a cornfield. And the Yankees and the White Sox just played there last night to date when we're recording this episode. And it was so cringy because like Kevin Costner gave a speech, and there's a famous scene in the movie where like all of these dead guys come out of the cornfield and they're baseball players, and they did that with the actual baseball players, and it was really cringe and it was really lame. But dude, I gotta say, it was one of the best baseball games of like all time. The White Sox walked it off. My man Tim Anderson, Eloy No Buttons Jimenez, my other man, it rocked. It was so cool, dude. And the Yankees lost, so everybody wins. Why do I
Good.
bring that
Well,
up? 'Cause of
congrats to the. Who was it? The White Sox.
White Sox, Chicago White Sox. They're my AL team, man. They're
Oh, okay. Chicago White Sox. We're in Chicago.
That's right,
Kennedy's
yeah.
definitely coming from a baseball team. Baseball game. Or going to a baseball game. or
And nothing
something.
bad's gonna happen at all.
No. Because the Secret Service happens to be on their game this time.
Exactly. Well, I mean, basically, just a plot gets uncovered that while Kennedy was supposed to be in his car, there were snipers who were all arrested in buildings who were going to basically just light him up and shoot him.
As the car slowed for a
hairpin
bend.
turn.
Going around the
Yeah.
bend.
And I mean, there's not much to this other than that the guy who was definitely involved, this guy named Paulino Sierra Martinez, surprise, surprise, anti-Castro Cuban, was basically later linked to getting all of this money for Castro Cuban activities from, among others, he got $30 million, which seems like guys, what are you giving him $30 million for? Just give him like a couple grand, buy some guns. That's all you need. He got this money from United Fruit, U.S. Steel, DuPont, Standard Oil, all these people. And basically is like some people, the law enforcement agencies started tracking him and they're like, what's this guy actually up to? We know that he's probably like an asset of the CIA, but like, let's just keep an eye on him. And because they did, they like realized that part of what he was doing was like setting up this big group of Cuban marksmen to blip Kennedy. And it failed because the plot was uncovered. But I'll say, Dan, you don't learn about this in American history classes.
No. And when was this? This was the 2nd of
November
November 63. I don't know what anything else happened in November 63.
Yeah, what happened 20 days later?
Yeah.
I don't know. Something exactly like this, but that was succeeded. Weird.
It had escaped my attention that the funding for this plot came from all of those American corporations.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just read this. The Chicago office of the Secret Service suspected Sierra was a more sinister figure than the FBI. Surprise, surprise. By November 63, Chicago, like Miami, New Orleans, and Dallas, had become a nest of anti-Kennedy intrigue. On November 2nd, local Secret Service officials foiled a well-organized assassination plot against Kennedy. After landing at Chicago O'Hare's airport that day, Kennedy was scheduled to ride in a motorcade to Soldier Field to watch the annual Army-Navy football game. Who gives a fuck? But the motorcade was canceled after the Secret Service exposed a plot to ambush the president from a tall warehouse building as his limousine slowed for a hairpin turn. The plot, which involved a sniper team composed of a disgruntled ex-Marine, boy, don't get near those guys, who worked in the building.
They're all disgruntled.
Yeah, exactly. That guy, a disgruntled ex-Marine who worked in the building. That's like, we know we'll come across another disgruntled ex-Marine who worked in a warehouse very soon. And at least 2 Cuban marksmen bore a disturbing resemblance to the series of events that became Kennedy's life 20 days later in Dallas. Insane.
Yeah.
That's just insane. I don't know. That's basically, I don't have anything else to say about it other than that. And other than it's just absolutely batshit. But like, oh, they didn't get him then. So they got him 20 days later. Oh boy. Okay, and now we Jesus Christ. Now we gotta
Now we get onto the good stuff.
now we get onto the good stuff, but we kind of have to backtrack a little bit because we got to talk about a series of people. We got to talk about Bill Harvey. We got to talk about Howard Hunt. We got to talk about our poor, beautiful Oswald. So to take the fattest first, we'll talk about a guy named Bill Harvey, who. This will be interesting to kind of open up a discussion about like class within these organizations. But Bill Harvey was like, he got to start, I think, as what Talbot calls as being like a red hunter in the FBI. So he was one of these guys who would go wiretap phones and beat the shit out of communists and labor organizers, right, during the McCarthy era. He was kind of like a hard drinking, like, you know, big fat guy who liked a good time. Pretty crazy. I don't know if you learn about Kim Philby much in the British school system, but he was the one who found out that Kim Philby was working for MI6, was a Soviet spy.
Yeah, now we came across this at certain points in this book. I don't know whether we ever talked about it. That was a really fascinating story that, like, how high Kim Philby got and how well trusted he was, even by Dulles, I think, and then was revealed to be like a Soviet spy kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there was reference made to like, yeah, it was him that sniffed him out kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's funny because the reason that he like sniffed him out or whatever was because it seemed like because they had very opposite personalities and he was just like, I'm going to get some dirt on this guy. Like Kim Philby was like an intellectual, like, you know, corduroy jacket, elbow pad wearing guy who liked a good cocktail. And
just like everybody else in this CIA world.
And Harvey was just like this fat whiskey drinking, like,
yeah, well, they called him the cop, didn't they?
The cop, yeah, exactly. And so he was, you know, supposedly had a confrontation with Philby and then was like, I'm going to dig up some dirt. And then he was like, oh my God, this guy's a Soviet spy. So that really made his name, and that made people who, like, he was not an Ivy League guy. Like, I think he went to like Indiana State or like some state university in the Midwest. That kind of got the CIA's eye on him. And he was eventually sent to go work with our old friend from a previous part of this series, Reinhard Galen, Nazi in post-World War II, who was part of the, like, this book calls them stay behind networks as part of the, like, West German, like, CIA-backed, like, the Nazis are still around killing communists kind of organization. That's who Bill Harvey worked with in Germany. Supposedly he really liked Germany, which I thought was very funny. Because he would not like...
despised Italy, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. So then after that, I guess he goes back to America and he starts working on a project called ZR Rifle, which was.
Well, that was is that not the name of the? Because all of the sort of like. All the CIA stations have these really crazy names. So like wasn't the Miami CIA station called
It
ZR
might have
Rifle?
been. I thought that was JM Wave. And then I think ZR Rifle was the broader project. I could be wrong about that.
Okay, no, but
Listeners, look it
I
up.
defer to your greater wisdom for sure.
But
Because
that
there are both operations, stations, and
yeah.
people that have these very similar
And
sort of,
agents
like,
and
code
assets
name. Yeah.
But anyway, basically he was just there organizing the connections between the underworld and the CIA to go and just do these raids on Cuba.
There was in this period of time, like the Miami CIA station was like the biggest, most staffed, most well-funded one in like the whole world kind of thing. Basically, because like
it was on a college campus too.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, which is just like, and it was ostensibly JM Wave. It was ostensibly a radio station for the university, and it had a budget of like several $1 million. And everyone's like, "Who's paying for this? What are they using these broadcasts for?" Like, the chicken is in the hen house. And then, I guess, like what happens that first of all, we should say that he organized the raids that were going on during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is batshit.
Yeah. And basically, he just continues doing it, and he continues trying to kill Castro.
Yeah.
And eventually, Bobby Kennedy's like,
"Fucking hell, mate,
you got to stop doing this. We've told you.
Stop, please."
So I can't remember the exact details, but he falls foul of Bobby Kennedy, and I think Bobby Kennedy is really out to like get rid of him.
Yeah.
By which I mean like sack him, presumably, not like do him in.
Not take him out.
Not take him out. Totally different language. Nobody's ever confused those two. So the CIA hurriedly like packs him up and sends him off to Italy to have him be like head of the Rome station for the CIA, even though he like doesn't speak any Italian and basically
hates Italy.
despises Rome.
and
he and his wife are there for like 2 years or something, and then reveal themselves to be like, I don't know, American Philistines basically.
I mean, we should say too that like that was him getting sent to Italy was seen as a downgrade, but what the CIA was doing there, and go look this up because this is a much bigger history, was like organizing again these stay behind networks to basically just kill communists. To like even socialists and progressives. And one thing I found very funny was him and his hard drinking wife. They said that at their house, communists used to throw live rats into their yard, and they'd have to chase the rats out with sticks. I thought that was very funny.
Yeah, I can see him now, Harvey the cop, running around with his revolver trying to like shoot at these communist rats,
pulling his pants up. Goddamn communists and their rats. And so, yeah, we should also say he worked with Johnny Roselli and said that was like one of the only, if you get the feeling that was one of the only Italians that he actually liked, which was very funny. This was when he was in America.
Yeah, one of his great contributions to this sort of world of espionage was his connection to the mob kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which basically came from his history in the FBI, the FBI kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's
what he brought to this world of anti-Castro CIA sort of mob triumvirate, which became so pivotal in the preceding years' events.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting because like you do get a glimpse into like the class structure of these organizations, because like as big of a deal as he was, they make the point that like Bill Harvey was never invited to cookouts. He was never invited to anything with like the upper echelon Princeton guys, and he never would have gotten a promotion to be like one of the big wig CIA guys. And that's because like
he went to the wrong university.
Exactly. He went to the wrong university. He was Irish too. But like also I don't know, it kind of goes both ways, because like the bigwig CIA guys, the Angletons and the Dulleses, like they would never meet with like Johnny Roselli and the other, like mafia guys and be like, "Hey, kill this person for me, please." They would leave that to like these basically just like ex-cop, like FBI guys. So I found that really interesting of like, where Dulles was the connection between like the bourgeoisie and the government and their mutual interests in the military establishment. Guys like Harvey were the connection between, guys like Dulles and the CIA to like the underworld. That was really interesting parallels.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that there are these like nexal persons that connect all these different worlds together kind of thing. And we did come across this sort of like outsourcing of these more murderous, nefarious acts, particularly the ones that needed to be committed in American soil.
Yeah.
When we were talking, and I don't know whether we talked about it explicitly in the last episode, but there was this instance of I think it was a Spanish academic, wasn't he? But he defended somebody in South America. I can't remember which country it was.
Republic.
So he defended the dictator in the Dominican Republic, and basically the CIA decided they were going to ship him back to the Dominican Republic, where he was eventually fed to crocodiles.
I believe it was sharks.
Sharks. I thought it was crocodiles. Sharks. It would make sense if it was sharks, wouldn't it? Yeah. We shouldn't make light of this. Really.
Yeah. Ha ha ha.
And rather than the CIA do it themselves, the CIA sort of farmed it out to the FBI, who then farmed it out to the mobsters, and so it was this other back channel basically of this dark and dastardly world.
Yeah, and it's funny how it is such a bullshit class thing where they're like, oh, I went to Princeton, I would never speak with this Irish policeman. It's just like, oh my god, such crap.
Yeah.
And later,
that almost becomes quite central to Talbot's speculations later on. It's like, who is actually possibly connected to whom, who could legitimately fall into what circles predicated on their sort of like class identity or the, sort of the material circumstances of their lives.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And I mean, like, if you were to be an independent researcher, like into these things, I don't know, it makes sense to look at like the Nexel people, right? The like personalities that are, because it does seem insane to be like, wait a minute, you're telling me that like Alan Dulles met with like anti-Castro Cubans and the mob and like all of these people and OAS guys to like then kill Kennedy? It's like, it doesn't make any sense, but it's like, need to know basis, baby. So yeah.
And who are the people you need to know?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so that's, well, I suppose we should also say that Bill Harvey, the reason we're bringing this up is because he was this nexus point to the underworld. And when he came back to America, at one point he was in Dallas in 1963.
Was he?
And yeah, he ran into one of his former colleagues at the airport. The former colleague was like, hey man, what are you doing here? And he was just like, fuck off. I don't want to talk to you.
Aren't you supposed to be in Italy? What are you doing in Dallas?
I'm not doing anything in Dallas.
Another instance of somebody mysteriously deciding to go to Dallas because apparently everybody went to Dallas in November of 83.
It's a tourist. I mean, now I would like to go to Dallas and go to Dealey Plaza. That's all I'm going to say. It'd be cool.
Stand on the grassy knoll.
Oh man, that would be cool. That'd be sick. Stand in the book depository and be like, could I make the shot from here?
We could get onto this, but do you remember, there's no relevance to coming onto this, so we'll talk about it now. You know the guy who owned the book depository removed the window?
I know.
That Oswald ostensibly shot through, and then on the grounds that if he didn't remove it, souvenir hunters would come and take it, but then he hung it on the wall in his house.
Yeah, I know. That's insane. Yeah. It's like, that's not suspicious at all. All right, so that's Bill Harvey, and he'll come up again when we talk about
Howard Hunt.
Howard Hunt, exactly. Our man Howard Hunt. Dear listener, if you know anything about American politics surrounding Nixon, you will have recognized Howard Hunt's name.
You will have come across something called Watergate.
Watergate, exactly. And two specifically of these people who broke into the Democratic Party headquarters in the Watergate Hotel were H. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis. And we're going to talk about H. Howard Hunt. Okay, I actually just have to read this bit from the book because this is so insane. So
I don't know what bit he's going to read, but it's all great. So
it was on this page. Where was it? The music you heard this episode was Music to Kill Bad People To by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. If you like this song, you can check it out and much, much more on their Bandcamp at kinggizzard.bandcamp.com. Be sure and follow us up on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you like what you heard, be sure and tune in next week for some more commie discussion. Till next time.